My name is Ethan Vance, and I'm 24 years old. Or I was 24. It feels like a lifetime ago, a different person inhabiting this skin. Before all this, I was just a regular guy from a small town in upstate New York. Nothing special to write home about. I worked at the local hardware store, saved up what little money I could, and spent my weekends hiking the trails that snaked through the dense woods surrounding our quiet community. I loved those woods. They were my escape, my sanctuary. The scent of pine needles and damp earth, the rustle of leaves underfoot, the distant call of a hawk. It was all so familiar, so comforting. My folks still live in the house I grew up in, a two-story colonial with a porch swing that creaked just right. They're good people, salt of the earth. My mom always worried, about me venturing too deep, especially after sunset. Dad, he just nodded and told me to take a compass, like I didn't know these woods better than the back of my hand. It all started last fall. The leaves were turning, a vibrant symphony of reds, oranges, and yellows before they'd succumb to the drab browns of winter. There was this old trail, hardly used anymore, that I'd been meaning to explore. It was marked on some of the older, less accurate maps, just a faint dashed line, leading to an area locally known as Blackwood Hollow. Nobody really went there. The tales were always vague. Bad luck, strange disappearances, a general sense of unease. Of course, being young and foolish, that only made it more appealing. I packed a small bag, water, some jerky, a good flashlight, and my old beaten-up flip phone that barely got service even in town, let alone out there. The first few miles were easy, familiar terrain. The path was overgrown in spots, branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, but it was still discernible. The air grew colder as I pushed deeper, the sunlight struggling to penetrate the thick canopy above. The woods started to change. The trees were older, their trunks wider, gnarled, and covered in thick moss. The silence deepened, broken only by the crunch of my boots and the distant, unsettling caw of a crow. I remember feeling a prickle on the back of my neck, that instinctive sense of being watched, but I shook it off. It was just the solitude, playing tricks on my mind. I told myself it was just the isolation, the creeping evening chill. Then I saw it. Not a structure, not a landmark I recognized. It was a clearing, but not like any natural clearing I'd ever encountered. The trees didn't just stop. They seemed to have been violently torn away, leaving jagged stumps and splintered wood. In the center of this unnatural circle was something that made my stomach clench. It was a tree, or what was left of one. It was massive, far larger than any other tree in the forest, and it was dead. Not just dead, but wrong. Its branches, thick as oak trunks, twisted upwards like agonized limbs, completely devoid of bark, smooth and black as polished obsidian. And carved into its base, deeply gouged into the blackened wood, was a symbol. I'd never seen anything like it. A series of interlocking spirals and sharp, angular lines that seemed to vibrate with a silent malevolence. It wasn't vandalism. It felt ancient, deliberate. I stood there for a long time, my breath fogging in the cold air, a knot of dread tightening in my chest. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn back, to run, to forget I ever saw this place. But something else, a morbid curiosity I couldn't explain, held me rooted to the spot. The air around the tree felt heavy, oppressive, almost viscous. It wasn't just cold. It was a cold that seemed to sink into my bones, a cold that felt alive. As the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the clearing into a premature twilight, I heard it, a whisper. Not a distinct word, more like a collective sigh, a dry rustling that seemed to come from all directions at once. It wasn't the wind. There was no wind. The leaves on the surrounding trees were utterly still. The whisper seemed to coalesce, becoming more insistent, almost like a buzzing inside my skull. And then, faintly, Undeniably, I heard my name. Ethan. It was drawn out, elongated, a sound that seemed to scrape against my eardrums. It wasn't my mom's voice or my dad's. It was something else, something ancient and hungry. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The beam cut through the encroaching darkness, dancing wildly over the twisted tree, the unnatural clearing. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight, constricted. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like lead. The whisper intensified, filling the space, wrapping around me, drawing me closer to the blackened tree. I could feel its presence now, a vast, malevolent intelligence radiating from the gnarled wood. It was waiting for me. And in that moment, as the last light faded and the whispers became a chorus, I knew I was profoundly, irrevocably alone. This wasn't just a bad feeling. It was a premonition, a cold, hard certainty that I had stumbled into something I could never hope to understand, let alone escape. My heart was a jackhammer against my ribs, each beat echoing the frantic panic screaming in my head. The whispers, no longer distant or subtle, were now a cacophony, a dry, papery rustling that seemed to come from directly behind me, then in front, then all around. It was like being enveloped by a swarm of invisible, whispering insects, each one buzzing my name, Ethan, drawn out and distorted. The air grew colder still, so cold I could feel it in my lungs, a sharp, icy pain with every breath. My flashlight beam, once a comforting spear of light, now seemed useless, swallowed by the oppressive darkness that pressed in from beyond its weak circle. The black tree in the center of the clearing pulsed with a dark energy, its twisted limbs appearing to writhe in the dim light, throwing grotesque, dancing shadows that mimicked impossible shapes. I finally managed to force my feet to move, stumbling backward, desperate to put distance between myself and that awful tree. But it was as if the ground itself resisted, pulling at my boots, making every step a monumental effort. My breath hitched in my throat as I heard a new sound, distinct from the whispers. A low, guttural moan, like something ancient and wounded, emanating from the base of the black tree. It wasn't human, not entirely, but it held a chilling echo of suffering that sent a fresh wave of terror through me. My mind, in a desperate attempt to rationalize, tried to tell me it was just an animal, a trapped deer, anything but what I instinctively knew it was. But the whispers intensified with the sound, seeming to relish my fear, growing louder, more piercing. Then, a flicker. At the edge of my flashlight beam, just outside the immediate circle of the clearing, I saw it. A shadow. Not the shadow cast by a tree or a bush, but a deeper, impossibly darker shadow that moved independently, fluidly, against the already profound darkness of the forest. It was tall, impossibly thin, and it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. My eyes strained, trying to make sense of the form, but it was like looking at a hole in reality. There were no discernible features, just an elongated, wavering outline that seemed to stretch and contract. And it was moving, slowly, deliberately, circling the clearing, always just at the periphery of my vision, always just out of the direct beam of my flashlight. Panic gave way to a primal, bone-deep terror. This wasn't a prank, wasn't a hallucination from being alone in the woods. This was real. Whatever this thing was, it was watching me, playing with me. I finally broke, a choked sob escaping my lips.
I turned and ran, blindly, stumbling through the undergrowth, my only goal to get away from that clearing, from that tree, from that thing. Branches whipped across my face, tearing at my clothes, but I barely felt it. The whispers followed, no longer confined to the clearing, but swirling around me, chasing me, closer now, 1,000 dry voices screaming my name. The moaning sound, too, seemed to travel, a low, resonant thrumming that vibrated through the very ground beneath my feet. I didn't know which way I was going. Logic and direction had abandoned me. I was just running, propelled by pure, unadulterated fear. My flashlight bounced wildly in my hand, its beam erratic, offering only fleeting glimpses of the twisted, spectral shapes of the trees around me. I tripped, falling hard, my face hitting the damp earth. The breath was knocked out of me, and for a terrifying moment, I couldn't inhale. I lay there, gasping, mud in my mouth, listening. The whispers were all around me, almost on top of me now, pressing down, a suffocating presence. I could feel a coldness, not just the air, but an unnatural chill emanating from something impossibly close. And then a smell. Something metallic, like old blood and rust, mixed with a cloying sweetness that made my stomach churn. I forced myself up, scrambling to my feet, my muscles screaming in protest. I ran again, faster, fueled by a desperate surge of adrenaline. I could hear something moving through the undergrowth behind me, keeping pace, a soft, slithering sound that was too heavy for a snake, too quiet for a large animal. I didn't dare look back. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but the thought of stopping was more terrifying than the pain. The trees seemed to close in, their branches weaving together overhead, blotting out the stars, trapping me in this endless, lightless labyrinth. Then, through the din of my own ragged breathing and the frantic whispers, I heard it again. My name. But this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a guttural hiss, right in my ear. So close, I could feel the icy breath on my skin. Ethan, you shouldn't have come. The voice was deep, ancient, like rocks grinding together, yet strangely intimate, a terrible parody of a human sound. My blood ran cold. I wasn't alone in this forest. I was being hunted. I stumbled out of the dense woods into what I hoped was a trail, but it was just another, slightly less overgrown path. I saw a faint, almost invisible light ahead, a distant glow. Hope, thin and fragile, flared within me. Civilization, a road, anything. I pushed harder, forcing my exhausted body forward, my eyes fixed on that dim beacon. But even as I ran towards it, the hissed voice echoed in my mind, a chilling promise. You're ours now. I don't know how long I ran or how I found the strength, but the woods, the whispers, the chilling presence, they were still there, clinging to me, a pervasive dread that had burrowed deep into my soul. I knew with absolute certainty that I had walked into a nightmare I might never wake from.
The distant glow ahead wasn't a trick of the fading light or my desperate mind playing games. As I stumbled closer, gasping for air, it resolved into the unmistakable red and white of a radio tower, its blinking warning lights a beacon of human civilization. I veered towards it, forcing my leaden legs to push harder, the whispers now a relentless tide crashing against my sanity. They seemed to press in from every side, dry voices rasping my name, conjuring images of skeletal figures just beyond the reach of my failing vision. The metallic, sweet smell intensified, a nauseating stench that clung to the damp air. I burst out of the tree line, tripping over a fallen branch and landing hard on what felt like gravel.
I scrambled to my hands and knees looking up. I was on a narrow, unpaved service road that led to the base of the radio tower. Relief, so potent it almost buckled my knees, flooded through me. I was out. I was out of the woods. The whispers didn't immediately cease, but they seemed to recede, held at bay by the artificial light and the faint, reassuring hum of the tower's machinery. I lay there for a moment, chest heaving, the cold gravel pressing into my cheek. My body ached in places I didn't even know existed. My clothes were torn, and a deep gash ran along my forearm where a branch had snagged me. But I was alive. I was out. Slowly, carefully, I pushed myself up. My phone was still clutched in my hand, miraculously unbroken. No service, of course, but the screen glowed faintly, showing the time, 1:17 a.m. I'd been in those woods for hours, far longer than I could account for. The sun had set around 7 p.m. 4 hours. 4 hours of being hunted. My mind reeled. I tried to make sense of it, to explain away the whispers, the shifting shadow, the ancient malevolent voice. Adrenaline, exhaustion, maybe I'd hit my head. But the fear, raw and visceral, wouldn't let me believe it. It felt too real, too deeply ingrained. I started walking down the gravel road, away from the tower, hoping it would eventually connect to one of the county roads. My legs felt like jelly, but I kept putting one foot in front of the other, every rustle in the surrounding darkness making me flinch. The whispers had quieted to a barely perceptible hum, a faint echo in the back of my mind. But I knew they hadn't gone away entirely. They were just waiting for me to be vulnerable again. The air was still unnaturally cold, even away from the clearing. It was a lingering chill, a mark of something that had touched me, something that had followed me out. After what felt like an eternity, the gravel road finally met a narrow, paved county road. It was deserted, of course, deep in the middle of nowhere, but it was a road, a path back to normalcy. I decided to walk towards town, knowing it would be miles, but unwilling to stand still. Every shadow seemed to stretch and shift. Every distant sound became something sinister. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that impossibly dark shape materializing from the shadows. The memory of that hissed voice, "You're ours now," replayed in my mind, a chilling mantra. I walked for what felt like hours, my body protesting with every step. The moon, a sliver of white in the black sky, offered little light. My phone was dead now, its battery drained from my constant attempts to get a signal, or perhaps from the sheer terror radiating from me. Just as I was about to give up hope, my vision blurring from fatigue, I saw headlights in the distance. A car. My heart leaped. I started waving frantically, yelling, a ragged, desperate sound. The car slowed, its headlights illuminating me in a harsh, blinding glare. It was an old pickup truck, battered and rusty. The window rolled down slowly, revealing the weathered face of Old Man Hemlock, a reclusive farmer who lived even deeper in the sticks than I did. He was known for his gruff demeanor and rarely ventured into town. "Ethan Vance, what in the blazes are you doing out here, boy? You look like you wrestled a bear and lost." His voice was a gravelly rumble. "Mr. Hemlock," I gasped, my voice hoarse. I got lost. Bad." He squinted at me, his gaze lingering on my torn clothes and the wild look in my eyes. He probably figured I'd been up to no good, drinking in the woods or something. But he just grunted, "Get in. I'm heading towards the turnoff to town." I didn't hesitate. I practically fell into the passenger seat, the old truck smelling faintly of diesel and tobacco. The warmth of the heater, even on a cool night, felt like a luxury. As he pulled away, I glanced back at the dark line of trees, the dense, suffocating canopy of Blackwood Hollow. I couldn't see the radio tower anymore, but I knew it was there, and the things that lurked beyond it were still there too. The sense of dread hadn't entirely left me. It was like a parasite, clinging to my insides, whispering promises of a return. I wanted to tell Old Man Hemlock everything, about the black tree, the whispers, the shadow. But how could I? He'd think I was crazy or drunk. Who would believe a story like that? I closed my eyes, trying to block out the images, but the whispers still echoed, faint but persistent, a sinister lullaby. I was safe for now, but the woods had marked me, and I had a chilling certainty that whatever had found me in Blackwood Hollow, it wasn't finished with me yet. Old Man Hemlock dropped me off at the edge of town, muttering something about kids these days and shaking his head. I thanked him, my voice still raw, and started the long, disorienting walk home. The streetlights felt too bright, the familiar houses too mundane after what I'd just experienced. Every shadow seemed to stretch and twist, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting that impossibly dark shape to materialize from the darkness between houses. The whispers, though faint now, were still there, a low hum in the back of my mind, a chilling reminder of the presence that had touched me. I finally stumbled through my front door just as the first hint of pre-dawn light was painting the sky. My parents were already up, Mom making coffee, Dad reading the paper at the kitchen table. They both froze when they saw me. My mother gasped, dropping the mug she was holding. It shattered on the linoleum floor, but neither of us noticed. "Ethan, my God, what happened to you?" Her voice was a mixture of horror and relief as she rushed towards me, her hands hovering, unsure where to touch the mud-caked, torn mess that was her son. Dad was beside her in an instant, his face grim. "Son, what in the blazes? You look like you've been dragged through a briar patch backwards." He took in my wild eyes, the scratches, the dried mud. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. My throat felt constricted, my mind a jumbled mess of terrifying images. The black tree, the swirling shadows, the hissed voice in my ear. How could I explain any of it? They wouldn't understand. They couldn't. I just shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. I just got lost, Dad. Really lost. Fell a few times. It was a pathetic lie, and I knew they saw right through it. Mom, ever practical, gently guided me to the bathroom. "Let's get you cleaned up. Then we can talk." The shower was a strange combination of agony and relief. The hot water stung the cuts and scrapes, but it also washed away the grime, the mud, the clinging scent of fear. I scrubbed at my skin until it was red and raw, trying to wash away that cold, unseen presence. But it was no use. The chill had seeped into my bones, and the whispers, though faint, were still there, a constant buzzing beneath the surface of my thoughts. When I looked in the mirror, it wasn't just physical exhaustion I saw. My eyes were wide, haunted, and there was a strange, almost feverish glint in them. I looked like a stranger. Over breakfast, which I barely touched, they pressed me for details. I gave them a watered-down version of events. I went off the trail, got disoriented, the darkness came quickly, I panicked, ran into some rough terrain, and eventually found a service road. I left out every single detail that would have labeled me insane. They exchanged worried glances, but didn't push. They knew I was holding something back, but I could see the relief in their eyes that I was home, that I was safe, or at least that I was back. The next few days were a blur of restless sleep and jumpy wakefulness. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside my window sent a jolt of fear through me. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I could still hear the whispers, feel that icy breath on my neck. My appetite vanished. I couldn't focus on anything. My parents tried to be understanding, attributing it to shock and a rough night in the woods, but I could see their growing concern. I tried to go back to work at the hardware store, but I couldn't concentrate. I kept dropping things, jumping at sudden noises,
and my boss, a kind but no-nonsense man named Mr. Henderson, eventually sent me home. "Take a few days, Ethan. Get some rest. You're not yourself." He was right. I wasn't myself. The old Ethan Vance, the one who loved the woods, was gone, replaced by this jittery, haunted version. One afternoon, a few days after the incident, I found myself drawn back. Not to the trail itself, not to Blackwood Hollow, but to the very edge of the forest. I told myself I was just going for a walk, getting some fresh air. But my feet knew where they were going. I stood there at the tree line, staring into the dense, dark woods. The sun was shining, birds were singing, but the trees still seemed to loom, ancient and menacing. I felt a pull, a strange, undeniable urge to go back, to understand. And then I heard it, clearer than it had been since I left the clearing, the whisper. It wasn't my name this time. It was a single word, faint but distinct, like dry leaves skittering across stone. Return. A shiver ran down my spine, despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. It was beckoning me. Whatever had happened in Blackwood Hollow, it hadn't just happened to me. It had become a part of me. It was waiting. I turned and walked away, forcing myself to move, but the word echoed in my head, a silent, persistent command. I knew, with a horrifying certainty, that this was far from over. The woods had claimed a piece of me, and it wanted the rest. And deep down, in a part of myself I was terrified to acknowledge, I wondered if I would eventually be unable to resist its call. The days blurred into weeks, marked by the constant low thrum of the whispers. They were like a second heartbeat, insidious and chilling. I tried to live normally, to go through the motions. I went back to work, forcing myself to concentrate, to interact with customers. My parents still watched me with worried eyes, their unspoken questions hanging heavy in the air. I kept telling them I was fine, that I just needed time to get over the ordeal. But I wasn't fine. I was deteriorating. Sleep offered no escape, only vivid, terrifying nightmares, where the black tree loomed, its twisted branches reaching for me, and the dark shadow danced at the edge of my vision, whispering promises of eternal cold. The strange chill that had clung to me since that night never left. It wasn't just a feeling, it felt physical, like a layer of ice beneath my skin. My hands were perpetually cold, even when the rest of me was warm. I started wearing sweaters indoors, much to my parents' confusion. My appetite, which had briefly returned, vanished again. I was losing weight, my face growing gaunt, my eyes sunken. I became easily agitated, snapping at small things, then immediately regretting it. My friends stopped calling, probably put off by my withdrawn nature and sudden bursts of irritability. I was isolating myself, pushing away the very people who might have been able to help. The urge to return to Blackwood Hollow grew stronger with each passing day. It was no longer a vague curiosity or a morbid fascination. It was a compulsion, a magnetic pull I found increasingly difficult to resist. The whisper, return, was now a constant, echoing demand in my skull, louder than any other thought. I'd find myself staring at maps of the forest, tracing the faint, dashed line that led to that accursed clearing. My feet would unconsciously guide me towards the edge of town, towards the trailhead. I'd stop myself each time, fighting against the terrible urge, my teeth gritted, sweat beading on my forehead. One evening, about a month after my night in the woods, I was alone in my room. The house was quiet. My parents were out visiting relatives. The moonlight streamed through my window, casting long, eerie shadows that mimicked the twisted branches of the black tree. I was trying to read, but the words swam before my eyes. The whispers were deafening now, a swirling vortex of dry, papery voices, all screaming, "Come, come home!"
It felt like my mind was tearing apart. I stood up, trembling, and walked to the window. The woods, dark and foreboding, beckoned. I could feel its presence, a vast, ancient consciousness reaching out to me, tugging at something deep inside my very being. It wasn't just in my head anymore. It felt external, a physical force pressing against my will. My blood thrummed with a strange excitement, a terrifying anticipation. I felt a sense of inevitability, like a puppet whose strings were being slowly, inexorably tightened. I knew I couldn't fight it anymore. Part of me, the rational, terrified part, screamed in protest. But another part, a cold, detached segment of my mind, felt a strange calm. It was a surrender, a giving in to the inevitable. I walked to my closet, pulled on my hiking boots, and grabbed my old, worn jacket. I didn't bother with a flashlight this time. The moon would be enough. Or perhaps the darkness wouldn't matter anymore. As I stepped out the door, the night air was crisp and clear, but I felt no cold, only that pervasive internal chill. I walked through the quiet streets of my town, each house a beacon of warmth, the normalcy I was leaving behind. No one was out. It was just me and the silent, pressing call of the woods. My footsteps were steady, purposeful, no longer stumbling with fear. The whispers were a joyous chorus now, welcoming me. I reached the trailhead, a familiar path that now felt like a ceremonial aisle. The trees loomed, massive and dark, but they no longer seemed menacing. They felt familiar, like old friends waiting for my return. I stepped onto the path, and the air immediately changed. It grew colder, damper, and that metallic, sweet scent of rust and old blood, it wafted through the night. But it no longer made me nauseous. It felt almost comforting, like a familiar perfume.
I walked deeper into the woods, the path growing narrower, the trees closing in. I didn't need to consult a map, didn't need to remember directions. My feet knew the way, guided by an unseen force, an ancient memory that wasn't my own. The whispers grew louder, clearer, no longer just my name, but a jumble of ancient, guttural sounds I couldn't understand, yet somehow recognized on a primal level. They spoke of depths, of shadows, of things that waited. Soon, the trees started to thin, and I knew I was approaching the clearing. The immense black silhouette of the twisted tree slowly emerged through the gloom, its branches reaching like skeletal arms towards the moon. It pulsed with a dark, silent power, drawing me closer. The whispers reached a crescendo, a roaring tide of voices that filled my head, drowning out all other thoughts. I stood before the black tree, its smooth, obsidian trunk radiating a cold that was profound, ancient, and utterly consuming. The symbol carved into its base seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, a silent invitation. The air was thick with the presence of something vast and terrible, yet I felt no fear, only a chilling sense of belonging. And then I saw it. The impossibly dark shadow, larger and more defined than before, separating itself from the deepest parts of the forest. It didn't walk, it flowed, a formless void that slowly solidified into an elongated, vaguely humanoid shape, its surface absorbing all light. It stood before me, unmoving, utterly silent. I felt a pull, a powerful, irresistible force drawing me towards the black tree, towards the shadow. It wasn't just pulling my body, it was pulling at my very essence, my soul. I raised a hand, not in fear, but in something akin to acceptance. The whispers surged one last time, a triumphant roar that echoed in the deepest recesses of my mind. And as the shadow reached out, not with a hand, but with a tendril of pure darkness,
I stepped forward, into the cold, into the unknown. The last thing I heard, before the whispers consumed everything, was the sound of my own breath, shallow and fading, as I was finally, utterly, completely returned.